Hi, I'm Jen Barnes, and you're about to experience how to ditch the old ways of doing things, embrace your neurodivergence, learn tips and tricks to function optimally, and love yourself, neurodivergence and all. Welcome to the Self-Loved Woman podcast. Hey, it's Jen. I'm so glad you're here. I want to touch on a topic today that has come up with clients lately, both in my Ascend program for ADHD women entrepreneurs, as well as with some of my therapy clients. And it's a deeper topic that, does require deeper work. So I'm not going to be able to just tell you how to do it right away. But I did want to name it and share a little bit about my process. And that thing is shame. So I get asked a lot about what do I do about shame? And if you listened last week, you heard me talk about how there are some emotions that are particularly challenging to work through, and that doing so alone can be so treacherous that it's really important that we find people to work with. Shame is one of those feelings. Shame is big. Shame loves secrecy. Brené Brown talks about that, but our shame is fueled by keeping it a secret. Because if we feel like we're bad, right? So shame is feeling that you're bad. But if you feel like you're bad and then you hide it, it's like, oh yeah, I have to hide that I'm bad. You're just fueling the shame. And so I suppose I should take a moment to talk about what shame is, especially shame versus guilt. And so if you followed Brené Brown at all, she's done some really good, I don't want to say really good, exceptional. She's done exceptional work, research on shame. And so I'm not going to reinvent the wheel here. I just want to share some of what she says about it. And one of the things that she says is that guilt is having done something that's not okay, or you could even say that's bad. I don't know that she uses that word. I'm not a big fan of the word bad, but you know how I feel about mistakes. But anyway, guilt is like, oh, I did something that wasn't okay, or I did something bad. Shame is, I did this thing and I am bad. And shame is the belief that because of what you did or how you showed up, that you're a bad human, or that you're a bad mom, or that you're a bad, woman, ADHD or entrepreneur, cat mom, dog mom, insert whatever, right? Employee, if you still have a job, if you're in that transitional phase of building your business. And so shame, it turns out, is actually not useful. In Brené's work, she cites other sources as well. Shame does not help people change their behavior. It just puts it underground so that they feel like they're a bad person, and then are just trying so hard to not be proven that they're bad or awful. But beneath that usually is an anxiety disorder, depression, not really living authentically, and just lots and lots of fear. And to me, that's no way to live. And it's not effective or productive either. And so we want to find ways to work through our shame, because walking around thinking you're a bad person, first of all, is just no way to live, like I said, but it's also not going to bring clients to you. If you think you're awful, no one's going to be like, yeah, that Jen person thinks she's really bad. She thinks she sucks. But man, I believe in her. I think she'd be great to work with. No one's going to say that. You've got to believe in yourself, and you've got to believe you're a good person. And some of that is acting in alignment with your values, which we talk about a lot. But even when we do things that are out of alignment, because we're human and sometimes that happens, or we make a mistake, we do something that's, like I said, out of alignment, or just not how we want to show up in the world, that doesn't mean you're bad. It means that you did something that's out of alignment with your values. So one, it's important that you recognize that you stop shaming yourself so that you're not adding to the shame shitstorms that you have. But if you're already in that process of shame and shame shitstorms and those cycles, I want to talk a little bit about how to work with it, right? Because we all have shame pop up from time to time. I've done a lot of inner work, and I still occasionally will have shame pop up where I'm like, ugh. And I work through it and with it, and then a lot of times it dissipates and I am able to figure out okay, there's some things I need to do here because I don't like how I showed up in that moment. So I need to address that. So a lot of times guilt was the more appropriate feeling, but once in a while, my parts will just take me straight to shame. So there's some unresolved stuff there. And a lot of us, I think that it'll still pop up from time to time. And for some of us, it pops up all the time. This is especially true if you have complex trauma. So I just want to say, like, while we're talking about shame, if you have a part in your head going, yep, see, you're not even doing shame right. You're feeling it all the time. I just want to name that, like, how much you experience shame probably is in direct correlation to both like your early life experiences, went to Catholic school. Hello. I hear growing up Jewish can be similar to growing up Catholic. I don't know if that's true because I didn't, but so you might have some shame. If you grew up in a traumatic environment, you probably have a crap ton of shame. And then it also is correlated or related to like how much of that inner work you've done, how much you've actually worked on releasing the shame and connecting with your highest self and having some self-compassion and self-love. So if you have a lot of shame, you're not bad. that believing you're bad because you have shame would just kind of like be more of the same shitstorm that you're in. So here's how I deal with it. And I'm going to try and make this episode short. Last week was a little long. I'm just going to cut to the chase on this one. Like I said, you come by shame, honestly, we all do. It's just part of it. And so if you can notice when you're in a shame shitstorm, that's essential because you can't work with something you're not aware of. I notice it because I feel like that, it's like that gross, warm, like it almost feels like your body's turning red from the humiliation of it. But like it's a hotness. For me, it's like there's a heat to it. And it just feels like it washes over you like lava. Like I imagine lava goes really slow and that's what it feels like. For other people, it might feel different. But if you can become aware of what it feels like when shame shows up, if you don't have a lot of connection with your body, and that would be particularly possible if you have a lot of unresolved complex trauma, right? Like dissociation from your bodily experiences and a lack of interoception are actually part of how trauma shows up. So like, no need to shame yourself for that. But if you're not feeling it in your body, you might notice in what you say, like, oh, I'm so bad. Or I had a client, what did she always say? I'm the worst. She'd always be like, I'm the worst. And I get there's some like pop culture stuff where I'll be like, oh my gosh, I'm the worst. Like, what's her name on Schitt's Creek? Like Alexis's crappy friend comes in. She's like, oh, I'm the worst. So I know there's some stuff around people saying that. It's just that you're shaming yourself when you do that, especially if you mean it. And so we want to get outside of those patterns, but also you want to notice when you're doing it. Because remember, emotions are our body's way of being like, yoo-hoo, something's going on, deal with it. And so we want to be able to spot our shame. And you might take some time to like write out, like, what do you notice when you feel shame? What thoughts come up for you? What feelings do you feel? Is there a bodily sensation? Like I have a really strong bodily sensation, but that doesn't mean you do. And maybe just notice that. You might hear someone else's voice in your head. I know it was very common when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s to say shame on you for like minor stuff, like just being a kid. Like, shame on you. You should be ashamed of yourself. Well, we know that shame is not effective in getting people to change their behavior. Yeah, they might change it short term, but then they end up all kinds of messed up with their intense fear and anxiety in adulthood. And I shouldn't say all kinds of messed up, but like, having lots of struggles from it because it's just not a good way to help people grow and heal and choose to do something different with their life. Okay, so the first thing is you've got to notice it. And because shame loves secrecy, I think it's important that you try and lean in and hear the message of shame if you can. And if that shame is too big or you feel like you don't have enough connection to like your highest self, it's important that you talk with another human about it. And this could be a therapist, right? Hopefully there are no therapists anymore using any kind of shame, right? It could be someone else who's earned the right to hear your story, someone who won't shame you. But really anyone who won't feel the shame is someone that you need to tell about the experience you're having. Because shame is fueled by keeping it a secret. And as we talk about it, both letting our highest self hear our part talk about it, but then also, even if that works for you, sharing it with people outside is really important. Because then we see like, oh, this person who cares about me knows that I'm not a shithead. They they just see that maybe I acted out of alignment, right? Um, how do we know someone can hold this for us? How do we know someone's earned a right to hear our story? Well, I like to use Brené Brown's braving for braving trust. Like, how do we know when we can trust someone? I learned about it first in her Dare to Lead certification program that I was in. And I'm sure she writes about it in other places. For sure, she writes about it in her book, Dare to Lead. But she talks about braving trust and that these are signs that a relationship can handle or hold space for this type of sensitive thing like shame and other things. So the first thing, braving is an acronym. B is boundaries. Are there healthy boundaries in the relationship? And I didn't say perfect boundaries, but are there boundaries? Can someone say, hey, I can't hold this right now? Can you say, hey, I can't hold this right now? Is there a sense of boundaries both being honored and being spoken so that there's not unspoken stuff? If you're in a relationship with someone who, when they're mad at you, they don't communicate anything or tell you what they need, that's probably not a super going to feel like a safe enough relationship to talk about your shame in. One of the things that, when I communicate my needs and boundaries with people, this happens a lot with my trauma clients, but just in general, is people are like, wow, I feel so much safer knowing where you're at with it because then I trust that you will communicate with me when something isn't okay for you. So then they know they can just show up and be their authentic selves. So that's something that's important to look for in relationships. If you're going to talk about your shame, is the person someone that if they couldn't hold it or if they had some other issue with you, would they be able to be honest? Would they be able to communicate their boundaries, their limitations? R in braving stands for reliability. Is the person reliable? Are you reliable? I mean, it goes both ways, right? You both have to be both. Both of you have to do all these things. Are they reliable most of the time? Do they follow through on what they say they will do? Do you follow through on what you say will do in this relationship? That one's pretty straightforward. Accountability is the A for braving. Is there a sense of accountability? If you or they do something that's not okay, do you own it? Do they own it? Do they take accountability and say, oh, I don't like how I showed up there. That wasn't okay. I'm very sorry. Here's my plan for doing something different. It doesn't have to sound exactly like that, right? But is there some kind of acknowledgement and accountability and a shift going forward to be accountable for the changes they said they'd make, right? Do they also do what they said they would do? Can you count on them? Do you do what you say you're going to do? Can you count on them, right? V stands for vault. And what this means is, can you trust them to hold your stuff sacred? Can you trust them to keep what you tell them confidential? This is really, really important with shame because if you're feeling like you're a piece of shit, going and telling someone who can't keep their mouth shut is not going to help you. Like that is not, having them tell about your shame is not the antidote to keeping, making shame be not a secret, right? It's you telling people and you in safe spaces and you hearing about your shame from your inner parts. So can the person be trusted with your secrets? Can you be trusted with theirs? Yeah. Integrity. This word is a big word. I've heard it spoken a lot of ways. Do they show up aligned with their values? That's how I think of integrity. And are those values similar enough to yours? I've heard integrity be like, how do they act when no one's watching? And yeah, sure, that's a good test to see. Does someone show up in alignment with their values? Do they follow through on what they promise? I mean, some of that goes back to reliability and accountability, but this is more about like, are they showing up in alignment? And are you able to do that? And again, with all this, no one's perfect. It's not about perfection. That's why accountability is in here. So you can name like, hey, you know what? I don't like how I was in that interaction. That wasn't my first choice or my favorite. Like that happens all the time in relationships, or at least it should. Should is a shame word. So it needs to. because that's how we actually work through stuff is when we circle back and we have a conversation like, ooh, I don't really like how that happened. The N is for non-judgment. That, I think, is probably one of the more essential ones if you're going to share about how you feel like a total piece of shit. You need that person not to like kick you while you're down. Like if you're like, hey, I feel like I'm a total piece of shit because I did this thing. If they're like, yeah, you kind of are. Like, obviously, that would be a horrible person to share this with, right? So you need them to be non-judgmental and you be non-judgmental around them. And again, these are things that we work on. No one's non-judgmental 100% of the time, but we work on it. And if we are judgmental, we own it, right? We're accountable for it and we keep working on it. Last but not least, generosity. Are they generous? And generosity in this is more about, will they be generous with you? Will they assume the most generous interpretation of your actions? So do they, automatically when you do something that maybe wasn't the best, are they like, yep, she hates me, or, oh, she's mean, I don't like her anymore? Or are they like, oh, that's kind of not how Jen acts. I'm going to check that out and see. Maybe she's having a hard day. That is the type of generosity we're talking about here. Can they assume best intent for you? And can you assume that for them? And I get that you might have parts of you who hold trauma who are like, no, we can never assume best intent for anyone. Because those parts learn to protect you at all costs. And that's fair. But can they assume that for you as best as they can if they have trauma? And can you do it as best as you can? Again, none of this is about perfection, but it's about trying to find someone who is safe enough, who's earned the right to hear your story, so that you can start to work through that shame. The other piece of this, and you've heard me talk about this process before with other big feelings, is giving yourself space to unpack it. I do that through writing. I write every morning 3 pages and it's like, oh yeah, okay, I'm feeling like I'm a bad person because I did that, Am I a bad person? I'm like, well, that's not true. I'm not a bad person. Like I have all kinds of evidence for why I'm not a bad person. So it's not true, but maybe what I did wasn't okay. And then I try that on and I write like, oh yeah, here's why it wasn't okay. Here's why it didn't align with my values. And then you start to figure out, what can I do? What do I need to do? I will tell you, one of the biggest pieces for releasing shame beyond like sharing it and seeing it and shining a light on it and all that is making it right. When I can figure out my role in something and then like do a repair or whatever needs to happen, that shame starts to dissipate. I recently went through a tough relational situation and I was feeling so much anger, rage even, to be fair. And until I was able to be like, okay, what was my piece in this? What's my learning from this? I couldn't release those big feelings. And, I had the shame of, yep, okay, got into this situation. Like there was some shame around that. Like, nice choices, Jen. Like, right? That's so shaming. It's not helpful. And so as I was able to unpack, like, okay, first work through the shame, like I just said, talk about it with some people, things like that. Then I was able to sit with, what could I have done differently to have prevented this situation? And not from a walls up, armor on kind of standpoint, but what red flags did I miss? What things were not great that maybe I let slide so that I can continue to grow as a human? When we do that, when we do all of this, I find the shame really dissipates. And it takes work. Like, how many steps was that? These are 6 simple steps to releasing your shame. That is not at all what I'm trying to say. Like, this is work. This is a process. And if you have a history of trauma, this is going to be deeper work that I highly recommend working with a therapist, right? Like an actual psychotherapist who's meeting with you for psychotherapy. I know I'm a psychotherapist, but in my programs, I'm in the role of coach. So, if you've got a lot of shame, I can help with some of this stuff, but sometimes it needs that deeper work. A lot of times it does if you have a trauma history. So, all right, y'all, big topics. Know that my heart is with you. And I look forward to seeing you next time. Make sure you share if you're not sharing already. I would love to, continue to help more people. And I can only do that by more people getting to listen. So, all right, y'all. Thank you. Take care.